Today we're going to see Perek Tet, which is our first introduction to Shaul. So let's think for a moment where we left off. We left off, Shemuel said, okay, I'm going to find you a king. That's where it ended off. And we saw there's a lot of, is a king a good thing? Is a king a bad thing? Perek Zayin, Perek Het, each one, identifying different aspects of it. Am Yisrael not feeling, that they want to be under the protection of Hashem. They want to be under protection of a king as opposed to a king who's going to bring them closer to Hashem. So we saw not a positive attitude, a negative attitude towards the king because of the way Am Yisrael are asking. And therein becomes the question of what type of king can solve this conundrum? What type of king can solve Am Yisrael being simultaneously requesting the wrong way, but avoiding the problem of what Am Yisrael are requesting? A king to fight their wars, while at the same time asking for creating a king who can be a positive presence amongst Am Yisrael. So that's going to be our question for this Perek. So we're going to have to look closely at our introduction to Shaul. And the assumption will be, based off this introduction to Shaul, we can determine what positive qualities he has and why is Hashem choosing him. So that's where we'll begin. So we'll read the Perek. We'll see. It seems to be a little bit, random, and hopefully we'll be able to put together some pieces in order to understand it a little bit better. So we'll begin Pasuk Aleph, and I'm going to read all the way until Pasuk Yud, and we'll pause at Pasuk Yud, and we'll see what happens. ויהי איש מבנימין, ושמו קיש בן אביאל בן צרון בן ברכורה בן אפיח בן איש ימיני גיבור חיל. So there was a man from Binyamin. He's a גיבור חיל. Okay, very good, right? So an impressive individual. ולא היה בן, ושמו שאול. And he had a son, and his name was Shaul. So it's interesting. Our first pasuk is not an introduction directly to Shaul. It's an introduction to his father. And this son, Shaul, Bahur Vatov, he's good. And Ish B'nei Yisrael Tov Mimenu, no one like him. Well, pretty impressive. Mishichmo v'ma'ala gavoa mikol ha'am, shoulders and above, taller than everybody else. So we have here an interesting thing. We have a combination of internal character traits. He's good, and he's tall. He has a physical presence as well. And obviously from here comes the thing, shoulders and aboves. The rest of them comes from Shaul in the figurative sense, comes from here as well, right? Mishichmo v'ma'ala is used today as a phrase even in Israel, the same idea, shoulders and above. And the story goes, "Vatovadna ha'atonot lekish avi Shaul, v'yomer Kish el Shaul beno, kach nait echad han me'hana'arim, v'kum lech bakesh et ha'atonot." Okay, they lost some donkeys, female donkeys, and he asked his son, "Please go take one of the servants and go find these donkeys." V'ya'avod b'har Ephraim. ויעבוד בארץ של אישה ולא מסעו, ויעבדו בארץ שעלים ועין, ויעבוד בארץ ימיני ולא מסעו. So it sounds like they went on a long journey. They're traveling a lot, looking for the donkeys. They can't find them. In Pasuk Hey, הם באו בארץ סוף. ושאול אמר לנערו אשר עמו לכו נשובה, פן יחדל אבי מן האתונות ודאג לנו. Okay, my father's going to start worrying about us. Let's go return. Research. That's what Shaul says. And he tells the servant. And the servant answers him in Pasuk Vav, ויאמר לו הננה איש אלוהים בעיר הזאת, והאיש נכבד, כל אשר ידבר בו יבוא. is a very famous, impressive man of God. Whatever he says comes true. Atan de Hashem. Let's go there because he's right here anyway. Maybe he'll show us the way to which we need to go in order to find the donkeys. Where we're going to go? What are we going to give him as an offering? We don't have bread left. We have nothing to give to him. We have nothing with us. But Yosef Hana'ala anointed Shaul, and he answered Shaul, it's okay, I have a quarter of a shekel, we'll give that there. And then the pasuk tet lefanim Yisrael kuyamar ish belachto lidrosh Elohim chuven elcha ad haroeh. Let's go to the roeh. Hilanavi hayom, what we call a navi today, yikare lefanim haroeh, was called a roeh back in the day, right? This seems to be like an insertion by Ezra, perhaps, that Barbanel suggests maybe in Miyahu, right? That we no longer call the navi a roeh, whereas they would call him a roeh, and that's going to come soon in a couple of Pesukim. So, and Shaul says, okay, I agree. Okay, let's go. And they go to the city where Shaul is, and the rest of the Perek is going to be an encounter of Shaul and Shemuel. This is our introduction. This is a random introduction, seemingly, from a lot of different reasons. Number one, it literally seems to be that they're randomly interacting. Shaul and Shemuel are going to have a random interaction based off lost donkeys, but also, which is probably the most significant, right? People have found the word matzah found 7 times in this Perek, like showing it's a motif of the Perek, the coincidence of what happened to be, which definitely can be true. And as we know, once you're highlighting the coincidence, it's probably no longer a coincidence. But also, at the same time, there seems to be some form of interesting development here that we're introducing the person who's going to be king as somebody who's searching for his father's donkeys. Is there a way we can deduce something of the character of this person based on the description we've seen and the conversation that he's having? That's number one. Number two, how do we account for the seemingly random introduction of Shaul and Shemuel? What is that? What's that happening? We'll see it's not so random. We'll see that later on. Number three, what is this idea of the person going to the Navi to find donkeys? And I'd actually like to start with that question because this is really an interesting tidbit that Rambam uses this as his example to explain what the role of prophecy, or one of the roles of prophecy that is supposed to be played amongst Am Yisrael. And that is, notice, they have a problem. It's a localized problem. It's not a national problem, but it's a pressing problem. It's a financial problem. They're going to lose money. They can't find their donkeys. It's going to be a financial burden for the family. So they say, okay, let's go ask the Isha Elohim. Let's ask the Navi, because he knows these things. And therefore they call him, it seems to be, that's why they would call him a seer, the Ro'eh, as opposed to the Navi who spoke words, right? There, the Navi was coming, especially if it's a time of Yirmiyahu. It makes a lot of sense. The Navi was giving national messages to the king and to the people. Whereas here, you could see the Navi functioning in a much smaller scale, and therefore he's a seer. He could see things. Who else had the ability or proclaimed to have the ability to see things? All the black magic people. They could see the future. They could see a horoscope. They could see a palm. They could see a forehead. They could see stuff that's going to happen to you, and they can give you predictions based off what they see. So therefore, they called it Navi Ro'eh. No, we didn't go to black magic. We actually went to these types of people. We went to the Navi. And the Rambam actually reads it into the Pesukim in Sefer Devarim, in which he claims that it's the Torah is saying explicitly, that the Navi is a God's replacement for black magic. Black magic was never really done on a national scale, it was done on an individual scale. And therefore, Hashem does not want you to seek their guidance and to go to the occult. And therefore, instead, you have a Navi who's going to give you direction instead on these small, mundane things in life. So it's very interesting that Obama is trying to claim that this story, as random as it may seem, is actually the norm. It also helps us understand why it might be called a ro'eh. Keep that in mind. This is something normal. What's more interesting, I think, for our purposes, is the idea that he should not greet the Isha Elohim empty-handed, almost as if it was part of it was a profession. Now we're going to know Shemuel, sorry, later on is going to say he never took anything for his services from anybody, which seems to be a direct response to an idea you could see here. But it seems to be Shaul was there. That's what used to be, right? The religious services you had to pay the same way you would pay to go for the palm reader. So you pay to go to the Isha Elohim. There's a fee involved because they're helping you, so therefore you pay as well, right? It's interesting, and it's actually like a theme within the story. You can see it was like standard, the fact that Shaul is asking the question, and the Na'ad doesn't say, oh, no, never mind. It doesn't say, no, we don't need to give him money. He says, oh, you're right, we do need to give him money, but it happens to be I have something to give him. So keep that in mind. Okay, but now let's get to the more, I think, interesting question. We said about the chance encounter between Shaul and Shemuel. We'll see later on in the Perek. And by the way, I think it's interesting. He's not even introduced as Shemuel Hanavi, like keeping the suspense. But I think the more interesting thing here, what is this? What are these 10 Pesukim trying to tell us about the nature of Shaul? So we'll start with the obvious. What we know. His father is a Gebur Hayil, a respectable man, and he's a Bahur Vatov, and Ish El Tovimenu, tall. So he has these righteous qualities. He's a good guy. That's really right. The father is a Gebur Hayil. He's Tov, and Ish El Tovimenu. He has pleasantness to him. He has the right midot as a regular person, and everybody just genuinely can like him. And therefore, he's tall. He stands out. Very good. So the question is, when we call them kingly qualities, when we see later on David, is David going to be described like this? Maybe not. But what do we have? If we're nervous about Am Yisrael looking for a king that's going to be a bloodthirsty ruler who's going to be a warrior and take them into war, God says, no. This is I'm not on that program, as we saw. He was angry at them. And therefore, he's finding someone who has an internal character of goodness, who stands out, but he's tall. He's not strong, right? Which the tall could be weak at the same time. So Hashem demilitarizing the request for a king by seeking Shaul, who's a good guy. He's not involved in warfare and military training or anything like that. He's his father's right hand man. That's what it seems to be. He's a loyal son to his father. Is that a significant aspect that the Perek starts off with the father, and Shaul is introduced through his relationship to his father? I think so. Meaning, he's not someone who is authoritative. He's not there yet. He doesn't have that, and you could sense that through his interaction with the Na'ad, that he's asking, what should we do? I think it's time to go back. Let's go back. My father's going to worry. He says, no, let's go to the Isha Elohim. He says, we don't have money. He says, okay, I'll give you money. You can see that they have this transactional interactions between them in which they're kind of equal, in which Shaul is not asserting authority, and the Na'ad therefore feels the ability to speak up. So I think that's significant. It should be of interest to note. And this, I saw this idea. I think it's interesting that when the Torah describes the king, one of the things, he can't think he's greater than others. Definitely Shaul doesn't think he's greater than others, but for our purposes, I think more the sense of authority. He's not operating out of a position of authority whatsoever. The second thing to keep in mind, if we're talking about And what the what the Navi here tells us is that he's from the tribe of Binyamin. What do we know about the tribe of Binyamin? At the end of Sefer Shofetim, they were almost wiped out to the point where they needed to find a mechanism to allow them to marry the daughters of Am Yisrael. They weren't available because they were almost wiped out. There were only 600 men left, and the Am Yisrael had a shivuah that they weren't going to marry their daughters to the sons of Binyamin, and there were no females of Binyamin left. That shows you how far the destruction was. Okay, they found a mechanism in order to marry them connected to Tu B'Av, interestingly enough, but for our purposes, Binyamin is a tiny tribe, nearly destroyed, clearly insignificant amongst Am Yisrael. Is it not only are we looking at somebody who himself is not authoritative, he's coming from people who are not authoritative, whose tribe is not one used to being one of power. Is God doing these things on purpose? I would suggest yes. It seems to be definitely so. Not only that, we see Shaul doesn't have money. They're spending all this time finding Atunot. We see he doesn't have anything in his pocket. We get the sense that this is not somebody who's spending his time involved in luxuries and indulgences, which for a king is forbidden. For Kesef is a have. Lo yerbelo me'od. Right? So I think these ideas are significant to what God is looking for, perhaps to the dismay of Am Yisrael. We're getting introduced to a good human being who doesn't have authority, who doesn't come from a tribe of authority, who doesn't come from wealth. And I think these things are significant. What do we have? What are the positive characteristics? Bahur Vetov. There's some who try to read into the story a little bit that you can tell Shaul is a little bit hesitant. Well, like we said, he's not used to being in a position of authority. How does this play into his growth later on? Is this going to be something of a detriment? Perhaps. But for our purposes, it's clear that this is what Hashem is looking for amongst a king. He wants the exact opposite of what Am Yisrael are requesting, and that's his way of fixing their request. This a king is important, but for the right reasons, in order to instill goodness, as opposed to the opposite. Therefore, this Perek and this first 10 Pesukim serve to highlight a very interesting response by Hashem to Am Yisrael's request, and almost in a sense, when Hashem is telling Shemuel, give them what they want, we now realize he's not really giving them what they want. He's doing significant damage control. So now they're getting ready to find Shaul in Pasuk Yud Aleph. הם העולים במעלה העיר, והם המסעו נערות יסעו לשאוב מים. ויאמרו להן היש בזה הרואה. They see outside the city, they see some girls drawing water. And they ask them, is the Navi here? So what do we have here? We're almost like we're ready to go, right? We've been primed from the Torah that we're at young ladies drawing water. We have a main character, whether it's Moshe, whether it's Yaakov, whether it's for Rivka. We're ready to say, okay, we have a marriage coming. Look what happens. They give an answer, right? He's asking, is the Ro'eh in the city? Look what they answer. Pasuk Yud Bet and Pasuk Yud Gimel. Yes, he's here. Maher, ata ki hayom bal hurry, because he came today. He's hayom la'am babama. He's offering a public sacrifice for the people. So you can see Shemuel, right? We spoke about he goes around to the people's towns, and what does he do? He participates in their religious life. They have an offering, they have a korban, and Shemuel is there offering the korban with them. As you enter the city, you'll find him right away. Right before he's going up to the bama to offer the sacrifice and to eat. Nobody's going to eat until he comes. He's going to bless the sacrifice. Then everyone assembled is going to be eating. And they'll go up and you'll find them. So, right, you get the sense that they said a lot of words, maybe a lot of, information that may have not been necessary, not really asked. They asked if he's here. Okay, yeah, he's here. We're going to be by the Zevach. Said, no, nobody could eat until he comes. And he's waiting for him to do the thing and go find him. And they say, yeah, and he's coming today to the city. What's all this happening? Hahazal and the Gemara, they have an interesting suggestion. And they're saying the girls are talking because they wanted to look at Shaul because he was so handsome. Meaning, Hazal are picking up on our well scene, the water scene outside the city, main character, and you have these women, and they're talking to him and trying to trap him, so to speak, draw him in, look at him, to get him to start talking to them. And he's not talking, so it seems to be as he wasn't talking, they just kept on talking and more and more and more, trying to create the conversation. And he's not interested. Why should that be of interest to us? Because as a king, you don't want your king to be too obsessed with women. One of the prohibitions, a king cannot marry a lot of women. And therefore we see Shaul is, not interested. This is not what he's looking to do. He's not what we would call someone who's looking for trouble, and therefore this counts in his credit. And it seems to be like another proof that this is Hashem's plan, who was suitable to be a king. ויעלו העיר in פסוק י"ד, הם הבאים בתוך העיר, והנה שמואל יוצא לקראתם לעלות הבמה. Okay, and they're coming, and they see Shemuel. Okay, so is this all by chance that Shemuel happened to come to the city in order to offer the sacrifice, and Shaul is looking for the donkeys, and he's ready to go home, and the Nard says, no, wait, let's go ask the Isha Elohim, and it happens to be they can't find him, so therefore they're going to ask, and is this all a coincidence? And it's funny, the Nard, how did he know that Shemuel came? What's happening? Pasuk Tevav answers our question. Vadonai galat was it Shemuel yom echad lifnei vo Shaul lemor. So now all of a sudden we see the name Shemuel. We saw it also in Pasuk Dalid. Right? Hashem revealed himself to Shemuel. He told Shemuel a day beforehand as follows in Pasuk Tet Zayin. Ka'et mahad ishlach elecha ish me'eretz Binyamin. Umshachto lenagid alam Yisrael. V'hoshiat ami b'yad Pilishtim. Fascinating pasuk. Hashem is telling Shemuel, I'm going to send you somebody. You're going to appoint him as a king. Oh, and he's going to save my people from the Pilishtim. As I saw my nation, I saw the crying out, the cries that they had came to me. I am listening to them, right? Very similar to Yetziat Mitzrayim story. Okay. Why is this pasuk fascinating? Hashem, you're supposed to be angry. Number one. Number two, the enemy is supposed to be Nahash, Melech B'nai Ammon, and Perek Yud, not the Pilishtim. We saw in Perek Zayin the Pilishtim after the war, they said they stopped causing trouble in the time of Shemuel. They don't seem to be the main enemy. Number three, we're using languages of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and he's going to save my people. Hoshiat Ami Miyad Pilishtim. Hashem is the Moshiach. Right? What's happening here? And the answer is, it shows you how complicated the thing is. Hashem, like we said, and I think this is one of the greatest proofs to support the opinion, Hashem wants a king. A king has a positive, a king has a good thing. And he could save the people. And the people are right, they need to be saved. But how do they need to be saved? By having someone who's going to bring them closer to Hashem. And the king has the ability to do that if we select the right person. Yes, the people were asking for a king as a military leader. He's going to go to war, but that's not the way you think. And you're right, the Pilishtim are not the immediate threat, but that's the idea. Hashem is saying there's going to be a long-term threat to Pilishtim. Nahash, the king of Ammon, is a one-time thing. We'll deal with that. But my people are going to have problems with the Pilishtim, and they need to be connected to me in order for me to save them. And the way they're going to be connected is by me appointing this fellow over Am Yisrael. This is his goal. Keep them connected, and therefore by keeping them connected to Hashem, Hashem will help them fight the Pilishtim in the long run, and not in the immediate sense. It's such a powerful idea. This pasuk is so interesting, especially when you try to compare it to all the points of information we know until now. And again, it becomes very hard to fill out the picture until you see it. And I think one of these things. And then in pasuk Zayin, ושמואל ראה את שאול, ואדוני ענהו, הנה האיש אשר אמרתי אליך, זה יעשור בעמי. And then he sees Shaul, and Hashem says, no, here he is, right? So Hashem coming both yesterday and today to Shaul at the time, is telling him what's going to happen, and tells him at the time that he is the person. Now notice, in Pasuk Tetzayin, Pasuk Yud Zayin, he never says the word Yimloch. We have Yatzod, Lenagid Alam Yisrael, meaning Hashem saying, I'm going to be the king. He's going to bring me to them, right? He's going to be the one who's guiding my people to me, as opposed to leading over them without God, right? So that's, I think, very significant choice of God's words in this idea. Okay, so now we have Pasuk Yud Het until the end is going to be the interactions between Shaul and Shemuel. Pasuk Yud Het. V'yigash Shaul Shemuel b'toch hasha'an v'yomer hagidam nali izeh b'tarueh. He approached Shemuel and he says, "Oh, where is the seer?" Like he could tell Shaul is just missing the point. Shaul, you can't read the crowd. You can't see he's the guest of honor that everybody is waiting for. Very interesting. And where's Beit Harueh? The Beit Harueh? Does it have a city? Right? Does it have a home? And Pasuk Yud Het. V'yan Shemuel et Shaul v'yomer. Anochi Harueh. Okay, it's me. Thank you. Alei lefanai habama. Come with me. V'achaltei mi'ami hayom. And eat with me today with the sacrifice. Sheshilachticha b'bocher v'chol asher b'vabecha agid lach. And I'll send you in the morning. And I know you're confused. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you everything you want to know. I'll let you know. What's everything you want to know? He's going to tell him in the morning, not today. Look what he says in Pasuk Kaf. La tunot, if you're worried about the donkey, is avodot lecha yom shalosh yamim, that you're missing for 3 days. Al tasem et libecha lahem kinusab. Don't worry. They were found. Umikol hamdat Yisrael halol lecha al chol bet avicha. Who is the desire of Am Yisrael? Who does Am Yisrael care about? Who's the glory of Am Yisrael? You and your father's house. So you tell them these things and tell you what you're worried about, what's in your heart, which we don't know what's in Shaul's heart. So we have to see what does Shemuel actually tell him and try to extrapolate why is that in his heart. And he tells him also, your family's house, right? Don't worry about the donkeys they found, but your family's house is the glory of Israel. Shaul, Hello, Benyamini, Anochi, I am from the tribe of Benjamin. Miketene Shiftei Israel, right? As we said, they got all destroyed. Umishpachti Atzeira Mikol Mishpachot Shiftei Benjamin. They're not even a known family in Benjamin. Lama Dibarta Elai Kedavar Hazeh. What are you telling me? He says, be quiet. Just come with me. Vayikach Shemuel Shaul v'naro v'yirem lishkata v'yitin lehem makom be'rosh ha'keruim v'hem ha'koshoshim ish. He gives him a guest of honor amongst the people eating, about 30 people. Shemuel tells the chef, you know that piece of meat I put aside, I told you put aside? Okay, give it to me now. He gives him the choicest pieces, and he gives it to Shaul. I was waiting for you. Eat this piece. So Shaul clearly is getting the hint that there's something going on here. And Pasuk Kafhei, V'yiredu mehabama, Ha'id, V'yidabenim Shaul al Agag, to have a little private conversation. Interesting, right? Why it has to be private. V'yashkimu v'hika'alot shahad. And then they wake up in the morning at dawn. V'yikra Shemuel Shaul lemor kuma v'shalahecha. Shalahecha. Get up, I'm going to send you. He goes, okay, come. So they walk outside again, have to be separate. Tell that guy to go away. Yana'ad, who's with us, tell him to go away. So we have this really secretive thing no one could hear. I'm going to tell you in the morning that they have a conversation after the meal. We don't know what it is. They're having another conversation. He sends away the nod. Shemuel is creating the secrecy. And basically what we're going to find out, he's appointing a king that nobody knows is going to be a king, which is fascinating. What exactly is happening here? And I will say like this, we'll leave this when it's going to be hard to understand these questions until we get to Perek Yud. So Be'ezat Hashem, we'll leave here on this point, that there's something happening. He has yet to appoint him as a king, and he's going to appoint him a king in an interesting way with some level of secrecy for some reason. We don't know why. And there's something going on in Shaul's mind that Shemuel knows about. He's going to tell him, and hopefully we'll see Perek Yud. We'll see exactly what's happening, and we'll try to discuss this in greater detail next week.